Hi everyone, today we're going to do something a little bit different and model a simple SciFi Kitbash part in a software called Moment of Inspiration, and we're going to export this model from Moment of Inspiration and use it in Cinema 4D. I've only picked up Moment of Inspiration about a week and a half ago, and I'm pretty excited about this software as it seems so easy to learn, and I was able to do something in this program very quickly. If you want to follow along, you can download the free demo version of Moment Inspiration version 3, which is the one that I'm using, and this demo version will be fully functional for 30 days. In this video, I'm not going to do a full introduction to Moment of Inspiration, and one of the reasons is that I don't know that much about Moment of Inspiration myself yet, but we're going to jump right in and do something with it. However, before we get started, I would like to show you a couple of things that hopefully will make it easier for you to follow along. If you open Moment of Inspiration, you will see something like this. My interface is slightly modified, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. When you open Moment of Inspiration, you will get this split view. You have the 3D view up here, the top view, the front view, and the right view. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the options down here. The first tab up here is the general tab, and I've changed the unit system to centimeters, and I've also changed the unit options to centimeters. And the decimal display is 1. And I guess this refers to 1 unit. In any case, what it means is that with these settings, one of these little dotted squares here is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. I've also changed the UI size to 11. You can drag this slider and make those icons bigger or smaller. The default I think is 10, but I've switched it to 11. And I've also changed the scene browser position. The scene browser is this part down here, and it shows the objects, types, and styles, and you can do different things here. By default, it is set to adjacent, which is very useful if you have a long list of objects here. You can also put it to the opposite side, but I'm going to keep it to inside for now. The next tab is the shortcut keys. For this tutorial, I'm assuming that you don't know anything about MoI yet, so we're not going to use shortcuts, at least for the most part. One that we do probably need is the one for isolating objects. And I've prepared a text file with all the shortcuts that I'm currently using. And because I'm coming from Cinema 4D, I've tried and configure things so they are similar to Cinema 4D, which makes it much easier for me to work in Moment of Inspiration. In any case, on this tab you can add and delete shortcuts. You can add any key you want here, and for many of the shortcuts you will need scripts, and the scripts are not something that you will find in the documentation. You have to look for those on the internet. And if I scroll down, you can see that a lot of these shortcuts are the same as the ones in Cinema 4D. E for move. I've also set up shortcuts for switching to different viewports, same as in Cinema 4D, and all you need to do really, like I said before, is enter any key you feel comfortable with here, and then you just copy the script from the text file and paste it into the command section here. The next tab is the View tab, and I don't think I've changed anything here, so this is just the default. Let's move on to the grid. And the grid size is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So what that means is that one of these dotted little squares here is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So forget what I said earlier about the decimal display. I don't really know what that means. That does not mean that this little square here is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. You can set the grid size under the grid tab here. So I've changed it to actually it's the default, I think, 1 by 1, and because I've picked centimeters as my units, one of these little squares is 1 by 1 centimeter. The grid sections is just the number of bigger grid sections, the accented squares that you see here, And I've changed the accented lines, which are the solid lines here, from the default of 5 to 10. So each of these accented squares here is 10 by 10 centimeters. And I've also changed the axis color to make it consistent with what I have in Cinema 4D. So for the x-axis I picked red, and for the y-axis I picked green. And you also have options to modify the grid lines. The default width is 1. I didn't change that, but I did change the color. If you open Moment of Inspiration, you will probably find that the grid lines are not very visible. So I've changed those to some darker colors. And you can do that by clicking on this color field here and then change the color. I've included the grid settings in the text file you can download, which also contains the list of shortcuts that I'm using. So you can use the same settings that I have if you want to. So this is for the grid lines, and the style is dashed, so these are dotted lines here. And for the accented grid lines, I have a darker color, and this is set to solid. On this tab here, which is for snapping, we're not going to change anything. What I've changed here is the straight snap options. The default is 90 degrees. I've changed that to 45. And you can do that as well if you want to. So that's all we need to know for now about the options. Let's close this. And let's have a quick look at the interface. Down here at the bottom under File, you can open files, save files, and create new files. MoI also shows the last 10 or so files that you used in MoI. And you also have save options. Here you can save your file. You can undo and redo actions, or you can delete stuff. Next is the viewport options. Right now we're in the split view. That means we have all 4 views here, and by left clicking on any of these buttons you can switch the views to full screen. So this is the 3D view, this is the top view. If you left click on it again, you can switch to the bottom view. Left click again, switch back to the top view. And the same goes for the front and right views. You can select them down here. If you left click again, you switch to the opposite view. I'm going to skip this part right here and move on to the snap settings. You have 3 options here: grid snap, straight snap, object snap. If you left click on any of these, you can switch them on or off. And for some of them you have additional options, like for grid snap you can show the grid, you can change the snap size. So by default it is set to 1 by 1, so I can snap to each corner of these 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter squares here. But I can change that to a smaller number. For example, if I enter to 0.2, for example, I can snap every 2 millimeters. But for now, I'm going to leave that at the default of 1. So that is grid snap. Then we have straight snap. I find that very useful. Let me just show you what that means. So straight snap is, if I just go back to my, let's go to the 3D view, and I'm going to switch that grid back on. If I draw a solid object, let's just quickly create a box. I can left click on it and move it, and you can see this additional line that appears if I move it parallel to the x-axis, and that is what straight snap is. If I switch that grid off, you can see that a little better. So it helps you to move objects along a certain line, along the x-axis or the y-axis or the z-axis. It is pretty tricky to move an object up and down, so what I usually do is I move to one of the other views if I want to move an object up or down. So I can click on this and it's a lot easier to move it straight up and down. So these lines that you are getting are the snapping lines. And because I've changed my snap settings to 45 degrees, I can also move it along here at a 45-degree angle. And if you remember, that is under the snaps in the options. And like I said before, the default is 90 degrees. And then you also have object snap, which just means that you can snap objects to other objects. So if I create another box here, and I have object snap activated, I can, for example, click on this corner of this object here, and I can snap it to any point on another object. And if I don't have that switched on, it won't snap to the object, as you can see. In each of the viewports, you have these icons at the bottom, which let you do a number of things like zoom in, pan, rotate. I tend not to use these buttons. I rather use the shortcuts that I know from Cinema 4D, because these are actually a bit clunky. The only useful button really is the reset button. So in this viewport, I've moved the grid over to here. If I want it back at the center, I can hit the reset button and the origin will be moved to the center of the grid. However, reset can mean different things. If I draw a couple of objects here, let's just draw 2 circles, and I'll move this one over to here. If I select an object and hit reset, what happens is that this object will be centered in the viewport. If I hit reset again, the entire scene will be framed. And if I select this object over here, same thing. If I reset, this will be centered in the viewport, and if I reset the viewport again, the entire scene will be framed. Making selections in MoI is something that took me a little bit to get used to, because it's a little different from how you do it in Cinema 4D. If you want to select something, you just left click on it. If you want to select another object, you don't need to hold down shift or anything, just left click on the object. And if you left click again, you can deselect it. Another way of selecting things in MoI is using the marquee selection. And if you drag this selection from the left to the right, you need to drag around the entire object in order to select it. You can left click anywhere in the viewport to deselect everything. And if you use that marquee selection and drag from the right to the left, you only need to touch an object to select it. So I'm just selecting these 2 circles and I'm going to delete them. I'm resetting the viewport. And there's something else I wanted to show you. Let's draw a box. So like I said, if you want to select an object, and in this case we have a solid object, you just left click on it. And with these solid objects, you can see the properties up here at the top right. It's an unnamed object, which means it will not appear in the objects list in the scene browser. And it's a solid object. You can see the default style and the dimensions. You can also change the dimensions here. And you have the option to switch off maintain proportions, which means if I want to make this cube a little bit higher, but not wider or deeper, I can switch that off and change that to 9, for example, hit enter, and the object will get bigger, but not wider or deeper. So with the object selected, I now have 2 options. I can go to face mode or to edge mode if I want to. So if I click on a face, I will now be in face mode, which would be polygon mode in Cinema 4D, and I can left click on other faces to select them, or left click again to deselect the face. But I cannot switch from face mode to edge mode, for example. If I want to select edges, I need to deselect the object, select it again by left clicking, and then left clicking on an edge, and that will bring me to edge mode. And now I can left click to select edges or left click to deselect edges. And I can also use the marquee selection. So if I hold down Control and drag from left to right, for example, I can deselect these edges. Or, well, that also seems to deselect the object, so I need to select it again, go to edge mode, and then use the marquee selection to select these 4 edges, for example. And like I said before, if you drag from the left to the right, you need to select the entire edge in order to actually select it. Whereas if I drag from the right to the left, I only need to touch an edge to select it. Let's go ahead and delete this cube. Over here on the right side, you can draw objects, you can edit, you have options for edit, view, select, construct, and transform. So if you click on draw curve, you can pick a curve that you want to draw. Let's click on circle and you have a couple of options here. I'm going to draw a circle from the center. And let's switch on grid snap, and I'll switch to the 3D view. And you can always find help up here in the top right. So MoI will tell you what to do. And right now we need to pick a center point for the circle. I'm going to pick the center point at the origin of the grid. So just left click and then drag. And because I have grid snap switched on, I can drag this radius out and snap it to the grid. If I left click again, I will confirm the radius and create the object. I can also go up here to this field and enter a number. And now I've created this circle, which is not what I wanted to do. So I'm just going to undo, Control Z, and I'll draw another circle from the center. What you can also do is, while you're still in the viewport, just enter the radius that you want, for example 10, and hit enter. So at any time you can enter numbers without going up here and changing the settings. So let's drag this out and make this 10 centimeters. You also have the option to switch that to vertical, which just means that you're going to create it in a different plane. But I don't want to do that. So let's keep it at the default here. So I'll just create that circle. And one of the most important things to learn in MoI3D is right-clicking. And right-clicking has two functions. In this case, I've just created a circle. If I want to create another circle, I can of course go over here, click on circles, pick the circle that I want to draw, and draw the circle. I can also right-click once I've drawn that circle, and I can create another circle with the same settings as before. Let's go back to the center though. So I can do this. If I right-click again, I can draw another circle. So that's one thing you can do with right-clicking. The other is to confirm actions. If I go to lines, pick polyline, I can left-click and create points to draw that line. And you can see up here that you can either pick the next point or hit done to complete this action and create the final curve. But instead of going up here and hitting done all the time, you can also right-click. And this will also finish the operation and create that curve for you. If I want to draw another polyline, I just right-click and again left-click to create the points. And when I'm done, I can right-click to finish the operation. So now that we know some of the basics of what we can do in Moment of Inspiration, let's go ahead and create our first object. And what we're going to do is something similar to this. And this is my original SciFi Kitbash part that I created in Moment of Inspiration and rendered in Cinema 4D. And as you can see, it's basically a cylinder with some details. So let's go ahead and create that cylinder, and we can do that in one of two ways. One would be to draw a solid object. So I can left click on cylinder, I have grid snap switched on, I pick the base point, that's what MoI says up here. So left click to create the base point, and then we can just drag this out and create the radius. We can also enter a number on the keyboard. In this case, I'm going to make it a radius of 10 centimeters. Left click again, and now I can drag out that cylinder. And if I have straight snap switched on, I can drag along a certain axis, like the x-axis here, or I can drag it out along the z-axis. And whenever you see that construction line that appears, you're extruding right along that axis. And like I said before, it's a little difficult sometimes to drag it up in the Z direction, so we can always switch to the split view and move our mouse to one of the orthographic views and drag up that cylinder in one of those views here. And I'm going to make this 5 centimeters. So left click to confirm, and now we've created our first object. I'm going to left click on it, and under edit I'm going to click on hide to hide this object for now. Another way to create that cylinder would be to start with a curve. So let's pick a circle. I'm going to draw the circle from the center, and I'll switch back to the 3D view. So let's create this at the origin, drag out, and I'll make this 10 centimeters again. So if I left click, I've created this curve. And what I can do with this is go to the construct tab over here, and I can extrude that circle. So as soon as I left click on this, I can drag my mouse up and down and create the height of that cylinder. And again, I'm going to make it 5 centimeters and left click to confirm the action. And we now have 2 objects. One is the original curve and one is a solid object we've created. Now the difference to drawing a solid object is that if I select that curve by left clicking on it, I can go over here to the edit menu and show the points of this object. And I can left click and drag on these points, and I can change the shape, and the solid will change the shape as well. And that is something that I can't do when I draw a solid object. And as long as these two are connected, I can still change that shape. If I deselect everything by left clicking here and then left click on the solid and let's move it over, I will break the connection between these two objects. So now if I move these points around, the shape of the solid will not change. And by default, MoI doesn't show the points. You need to tell it to show those points. So if I click on this again, it's going to hide the points again. In this case, I'm just going to delete these two objects and then click on hide to unhide the original cylinder we've created. And we're going to work with this one. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a chamfer on this edge here. If you take a look at the finished model, you can see that up here. So we're going to create that. And in order to do that, we need to left click to select the object and then go to edge mode by selecting the edge. In this case, we only need to select this edge up here. And in order to chamfer it, we need to go to the construct tab, and we have a fillet option here. And we can either fillet this edge, which will create a round edge, or we can chamfer it. In this case, I want to chamfer this edge. And up here you can see the options that we have. So we can pick a distance, we can enter this here, or we can enter the distance in the viewport. So for example, I'm entering 1, and if I hit enter, the chamfer will be created. And as long as I don't hit the done button or right click in the viewport, I can still change the distance. So maybe I want 2, so I type 2, hit enter, and the chamfer will be changed to 2. Another way of interactively changing the distance is by clicking twice on the grid. In this case, I'm going to switch off grid snap. So if I left click once, then drag my mouse a certain distance, left click again, the distance of the chamfer will change, and you can see it's 2.4. And I can keep doing that for as long as I want until I'm happy. I can also switch on grid snap, so I can snap in increments of 1 in this case, because we have 1 by 1 centimeter grid lines here. Or I can make this 2 centimeters or 3. In this case, I am going to pick 1.5 though. So I'll just enter 1.5, hit enter, and for some reason that's not working. I'll try 1,5, and that is working. This might be a bug. It might have something to do with my shortcuts. Let me just check the keys. No, it's not the shortcuts. So I'm not sure why this is happening sometimes, but if it happens to you, try 1,5 instead of 1.5 instead. So I'm happy with this chamfer, so I can either hit the done button or I can right click in the viewport, which is the faster way to do this. So I'm just going to right click, and now I have this chamfer on my object here. And I'm not sure if I mentioned that before. If I didn't, I probably should. Like I said, you can move around the interface with these buttons down here, but I'm using the ones from Cinema 4D. So for me, pressing the Alt key, right-clicking and dragging means that I can zoom in and out. If I hold down Alt and left-click and drag, I can rotate. And if I hold down the middle mouse button, I can pan. I'm holding down the Alt key as well, which doesn't do any harm. I'm just used to doing it from Cinema 4D. So hold down Alt, left click and drag, you can rotate. If you hold down the middle mouse button, you can pan. And if you hold down Alt and right click and drag, you can zoom in and out. Next, I want to create this cutout here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the top view, switch off grid snap, and I'm going to draw a curve. We're going to start with a circle from the center, and well, actually let's switch on grid snap. I want to make sure that I create it at the center line here. So I left click to create the first point, then switch off grid snap and drag out the radius. In this case, I'm going to make it 1, so I'm just going to type 1 and hit enter. And in order to create the rest of the shape, we also need a rectangle. So we're going to draw another curve, and this time it's going to be a rectangle, and I want to use this 3-point rectangle. So I can snap it to points on that circle here. And I also want to switch on object snap for that. So let's create, or let's click on this icon here. And now we can snap to this point on the circle, to this point, and then we can drag out that rectangle. Doesn't matter how long it is. Let's drag it out to about here. And in order to make things a little bit easier to see, I can do one of two things. I can left click to deselect everything, select this object here, which is our base. Let's go ahead and name that. And once I've named it, you can see it's available down here in the scene browser under objects. And I can make it invisible here, or make it visible again. And I can also select it over here on the right, or deselect it. So we could, for example, hide the object for now. And then I'm going to select these two curves. And what I need to do in order to combine these two is I need to trim them. And you can find the trim option under the Edit tab here. So let's click on Trim. You can see the instructions up here. First of all, we need to select the cutting objects. We've already selected our curves here, so we can just right click to confirm. And then we have an option to select the pieces we want to remove. You can do that right now, or you can do that once you've finished the operation by right clicking. I'm just going to right click in the viewport to finish the operation. And then I can select the parts that I don't want, which is this one, and delete these two curves. We don't have a single object yet. If you left click here, you can see we have this part, and this one is still a separate object. And up here you can see it's a curve. It's not a closed curve. And what I'm going to do to combine these two is I'm going to left click to select them both, and then I can use the join option under edit here. So as soon as I hit join, it's going to turn into a single object, and I can show the points and modify the shape if I want to. In this case, I don't need to do that. So let's just switch that off. I'm going to make our base visible again, and let's switch to the right view. and I want to move this up. And for this I don't need object snap, and I can just left click and drag this up, and make sure you drag along the construction line. That's why I have straight snap switched on. If I switch off that grid for a second, you can see that a little better, hopefully. So if I left click and move this up, you can see once one of these construction lines appears, I can move it along these construction lines. I'll just undo that, switch on grid snap again, and I'm also going to show that grid again. So I'll just move this up above the object a little bit. Let's go back to the perspective view, switch off grid snap, and next what I'm going to do with the object selected, I'm going to go to construct and use extrude, and I'm going to extrude this down a bit to say about here. We can also use object snap and, for example, snap it right to the middle of this line here if we want to. Let's go ahead and do that. And now we've created a solid object from that curve, and we don't really need that curve anymore, so I'm just going to select it and delete it. And I want to add a little extra detail to this shape, so I'm going to select it and I'm going to this time isolate it. And if you remember, this is one of the shortcuts here. It's Alt Q. And isolating is one of the most important shortcuts to learn. You won't find it in any of the menus here. You can hide an object and unhide it, but you can't isolate it. And by the way, you can isolate anything, so you need to be a little bit careful when you use that. For example, if I go to edge mode here and select this edge and hit Alt Q to isolate, I can isolate the edge on this object here. And if I hit Alt Q again, I make everything visible again. So in this case, I'm going to select this object, hit Alt Q, just so we can see things a little better. And I'm going to edge mode and select these edges here. And I'm going to add a chamfer to these. And 1.5 is a little big, so I'll try 0.2, and I guess we could make this a little bit bigger. Let's try 0.4, and again I'm just entering these on the keyboard, and this is not working, so I'm trying 0.4, and this is working, and let's try 0.5, and I think I'll stick with that. So I'll right click to confirm this operation. You can also hit the done button if you want to. And there we go. Now I'm hitting Alt Q again to make our base visible again. And what I'll do now is I'll left click on the base to select it. And then I'm going to construct and do a Boolean operation. And I want to do a Boolean difference here. And I need to select the objects that I want to subtract. In this case, it's just this one here. And right click to confirm the operation, and there we have our cutout. And I'm not really liking this because the edges here are very close together. This will be a problem when we try and add chamfers to some of the edges. So I'll just go back a few steps and select this object again. I'm going to isolate it, and I'll go into edge mode and select these edges again and use chamfer. And this time I'm going for maybe 0.2, 0.3, and well, that didn't work so well. I think this could be a little more. Let's try 0.4. Right click to confirm, Alt Q. I think I just deleted the other object, didn't I? Let me just redo. Oh, there we go. So let's just do that again. I'm going to isolate this object and select these edges, chamfer, done, hit Alt Q to make everything visible again. And I think I'm going to move this down a little bit further. So let's go to our split view. Let's go to the front view. and I'm just going to left click on the object and drag it down a little bit. And before I do, I'm going to switch off object snap, and I'm going to move this down to maybe about here. Let's go back to the perspective view, deselect everything, select the base. Let's do a Boolean difference, select the object that we want to subtract, right click, and I think this will work a lot better. So I'm going to stick with this, but I'm going to undo that for now. I just wanted to see how it looks. And I think I'm also going to select this object and just move it over a little bit further to maybe about here. And I also think I want to make this a little less wide. So with the object selected, I'll left click up here and I'll change, I think it's the Y size. Let's just try that. 1, yeah. And I'll make this 1.5. Please note that I have unchecked maintain proportion, so I'm only scaling this on one axis, which maybe is not what I want. So I'm just going to undo and check maintain proportions, and I'll change the size to 1.5, and maybe let's move that back towards the center a little bit, something like this maybe. So back in the top view, the next thing I want to do is I want to rotate this a little bit. And the reason I want to do that is because we need to add this cutout here. And I want to make sure that I can do that along the center lines of the grid. So what I'll try and do is rotate this object. And for this, I'm going to the Transform tab and use the Rotate button. And as soon as I click it, MoI asks me to pick the center of rotation. And in this case, I'm going to pick the center of the grid. And then I can snap the second point, which is the first reference point, to this object here. And then I need to pick a second reference point. And let's rotate it to, well, let's rotate it to about here. So this is a 45-degree angle. And I'm getting this construction line because in the options under snaps, I have my snap angle for the straight snap set to 45 degrees. Okay, so 45 is fine with me. So I'm going to left click to confirm this operation. And there we are. And we need a number of copies around this object that we're going to subtract from our base. And we can do that with the array option. And you can find that array option under the Transform tab, array. And in this case, we want a circular array. And again, we need to pick a center point. I'm going to pick the origin or the center of the object. In this case, it's the same. If the object is not at the center of the grid, you want to make sure to switch on object snap so you can snap to the center of the object and create the array relative to the center of the object rather than relative to the center of the origin, for example. So let's go ahead and pick the origin point, and as soon as I left click, MoI will create the copies. And I can still change the count. In this case, I do want 8, and we can keep all the default settings. So right click to confirm, and now we have all of these copies here. And I still think these are a little bit big, so I'm going to hit Ctrl Z, select this object again, go to my dimensions here, and I'll change that to, say, 5, hit enter, and 5 may be a little bit small. Let's change that to 6. Let's go to the top view, and maybe select the object, switch off grid snap, and I'll just move it towards the center a little more, something like this. And with the object selected, I'm going to create that array again. Let's see how that looks. And I think this is fine, but we could move the object down a little bit further. So I'll just switch to one of my orthographic views and switch off grid snap. And I'll just move this down a little bit further, something like this maybe. Let's go back to the top view, switch on grid snap again, and let's do another array. Okay, and that should be fine. So I'll just keep that. So now what we can do is select our base and go to construct and not extrude, do a Boolean difference, and we need to select the objects to subtract. We can simply drag from the left to the right to select all the objects that we want to subtract here, and right click to confirm the operation, and now we've got this. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. So let's move on and create the next detail, which is this one here. And taking a look at this, I'm still not happy with what I have. Also, I've created these cutouts right at the center line where I don't want them. So I'll just go back a few steps, and what I'll do is, let's go to the top view. I'll select this object and just move it out a little bit further, and I'm also going to make it a little bit bigger. Let's do 6.5. Let's go back to the top view, and with the object selected, I'm going to do another array, and I'll just use 6 copies instead of 8, which is not what I want. I wonder if we can just, let's stick with 8 and remove every other one. So I'll just confirm this and then select these 4 and delete them. Oh, deleted one too many. So let's just deselect this one by left clicking on it, and I'll just delete these 4 ones. Okay, and then I'm going to do a Boolean difference on these. So again, Boolean different, select the objects that I want to subtract, right click to confirm, and now we've got this. So now we can continue and create that other detail. So the object is looking a little bit different than the one I did before, but that's fine. And you know what, I'll just go back again, and because we're using fewer copies, we might as well change the size back to maybe 7 or even 8, which I think was the original. Let's go to the top view, and I'll just move this out a little bit further, maybe not that far. So let's do something like this. I'm improvising this a little bit. Like I said, I'm new to MoI as well, so I'm trying out a lot of stuff and I have to go back and forth a lot of times. But it's a lot of fun playing around with MoI, and I hope you don't mind me changing things around time and again. So let's do that array again. And I'm going to delete these 4, select this object, go to construct, Boolean difference, select the objects I want to subtract, and right click to confirm the operation. So I think that's looking fine. So now let's continue with the next detail, which is this part here. And in order to create that, I'm going to start with a curve, and I'll draw a polyline, and I want object snap here. I'm going to, well, for now I'm going to snap to the surface, make sure I make perpendicular, I create my points perpendicular to the axis here. So you can see quad perp, that means we're creating a straight line. And I'll bring this down to maybe about here, and then let's undo that. I want to make that straight, and let's move it down to about here maybe, and then right click to confirm the operation. Next, what we need is a path spline, and in order to get that, I'm going to select the base, and I'm switching to edge mode by selecting this edge, and I can copy and paste this edge. So Control C, Control V, and now we have this separate curve here. I'm going to left click on this one to select it as well, hit Alt Q to isolate these two objects. Or maybe before I do, I want to do something else. Let's go to the top view and I'm going to draw two more lines. So let's go to lines. We just need a single line and I'm going to draw a line maybe here and I'll move it out to about here. We can do a perpendicular snap to that curve here. Okay, so now we've created that line. Deselect everything, select this line, and I'm going to use the transform tab and I'm going to mirror this curve over to the other side. So let's click on mirror and we need to pick a mirror plane. So pick the start point. So left click once and then drag the mouse over until it is mirrored over to the other side, which is here. So left click again to confirm the operation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this new curve, select the profile we've created, and I'm going to select the path curve and I'm going to hit Alt Q to isolate these. Let's go to the perspective view, deselect this one, and what I want to do with the other ones is I want to trim them. So with these splines selected, I'm not sure if this is going to work because they're not the same height, but let's just try that. So I'll switch back to the top view and here under the edit tab I'm going to click on trim and I'll just confirm everything. We've already selected our cutting objects. So right click and right click again. We're going to remove the parts that we don't need manually. So right click again and then we can select the parts that we don't need and delete them. So apparently for trimming we don't need to align the objects. So now we've got these two curves left and we can sweep that profile along that path spline. But before I do that, I want to select this curve and I want to create an offset. So let's click on offset. We need this option here and I want the offset to go both ways and I don't want object snap. So we're getting an offset like this. I do want to cap the ends because I want to create a solid curve here, and let's do a distance of, let's try 0.5 and let's say this is okay. So I'll just left click in the viewport this time to confirm the action. We can now get rid of this original curve here and now I want to sweep this profile along that path. So what I'll do is I'll select this curve here and under construct we have a sweep option, and if I click that I need to select a rail, and the rail is what in Cinema 4D would be a path spline, so it's this one here, and I can right click to confirm the operation, and in this case it's working, but it's not exactly what I want, because what I want is to select this curve, show the points, select these 2 points, go to my top view, and I want to move them away from the center a little bit to maybe about here. And I think that looks about right. So let's select both of these curves again. I'm going to hit Alt Q again to isolate them and switch off show points. Select this curve, sweep, select the rail spline, right click, and there we go. So right click again, we need to confirm this action. And we can get rid of these 2 curves, they're still selected, and hit Alt Q to make everything visible again. And next I'm going to use another Boolean operation to get that shape into our main shape here. So let's select our base and I'm going to do a Boolean merge this time. If I make Boolean difference, let's just try that. I can select this object, right click, and done. We get a cutout like this. But that's not what I want. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Boolean merge. So let's click on that. We need to select the object to merge, which is this one. Right click, and now we get something like this. And what we can do is we can select this object here and delete it, and we get another object here that fits right into that space. And we also have an inside here. So that is exactly what I want. But of course I want this to be copied around on the object. So before I actually use that Boolean operation, I want to copy this around. So with the object selected, I'm switching to the top view. I'm going to go to transform array, and we're going to do another circular array. We need to pick the center point, which is here, and I only want 4 copies this time. So right click to confirm the operation, and now we can select our, first of all deselect everything, then select the base, and then go to construct, Boolean Merge, and we need to select the objects to merge. I'm just going to draw a marquee selection from the right to the left. So I only need to touch the objects to select them, and right click to confirm the operation, and then I'm just going to select the objects at the top and delete them. There is one more detail I would like to add before I start chamfering or filleting the edges. And what I want to do is I want to create kind of a groove at the bottom of the base here. And there's a number of ways we can do that. I'm just going to select these objects and hide them. And I'm going to draw a new solid object, simple box. So in order to create that groove, we could draw a curve. I could just draw a straight line like this, or let's go ahead and draw a freeform curve instead. And I'll pick through points, which is like the Bezier curves in Cinema 4D. And what I'll do is I'll pick a point here. I have grid snap switched on. I'm going to, let's also switch on object snap so we can snap to the center of the object. Well, that didn't work so well. You know what? I'll just go ahead and move this object to the center. So now let's draw that curve like this. Right click to confirm, and there's one of 2 ways we can create that groove here. So with the cube selected, I'm going to use a Boolean merge, and I need to select the objects that I want to merge. In this case it's that curve here, and right click to confirm. And what we get is 3 different objects. One here at the top, one at the bottom, and we have this curve here. And if you go to the perspective view, you can see we've created solids. Another way to do this is, instead of using Boolean merge, we could use the trim option. So with the object selected, I'm going to select trim, and then I need to select the cutting object, which is this curve, and right click to confirm the operation. And it looks the same as the merge option, but if I need to confirm this. Sorry, let me just undo that. I just automatically removed one of the objects. So let me do that again. So with the cube selected, hit trim, select the cutting object, which is the curve, right click to confirm, right click again, and we have again 3 objects. The difference is that this time we are getting hollow objects. So if you use trim, you get a hollow object. If you use merge, you get a solid object. And this hollow object may not be what you want. Now, one thing you can do in MoI is you can close those surfaces. In this case, however, we cannot use planar, which is what you would usually use because it's a curved shape. So what I would need to do in order to close that surface is to select the object, go to edge mode and select these 2 edges, and then use loft under construct here to create a surface. Right click to confirm the operation. And now what we have is 2 different objects. And what we could do is select both of them and join them to turn this into a solid object. If you have a straight surface, so I'll just do that again, and let me just isolate this cube. Actually, let's just go ahead and delete all of these. I'll just start fresh. So let's create a cube here. And I'll create another curve, and this time I'm just going to draw a straight line. And I'll select the cube and again trim the object, select the cutting object, confirm twice, so we get these 3 objects which are hollow. And because it's a straight surface, I can now just select this object and use planar under construct to close that opening. So these are the 2 ways that we can create this additional detail at the bottom of our object. However, that is not actually what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to create a groove, and the way we can do that is by selecting the object, go to edge mode and select these edges here at the bottom. I can hit Ctrl C, Ctrl V to copy them, hit Alt Q to isolate them, and right now these are separate curves. So what I need to do is I need to select them and join them. Hit Alt Q again to make the cube visible again. And what I can do with this curve is I can take it and move it up a bit, and then I can go to construct offset and use the offset option like we did before. Let's just use the same radius as before. I'll just left click to confirm, and I can delete this curve here at the center, then select these 2 curves which are separate objects, and we can't join these, but we can select them both and extrude them. And let's extrude them up a little bit, left click to confirm, let's hit delete these 2 curves, and then we can select that cube and do a Boolean difference, select the object to be subtracted, right click to confirm, and now we have this groove. And that's what we're going to do for our SciFi prop. So I'm just going to delete this, and let's see, let's unhide our original object. I'm going to select the base, then go to edge mode by selecting this edge, hitting Ctrl C, Ctrl V. Now in this case we are getting a solid curve because it's a circular shape. And let's hit Alt Q again, go to the front view, and I'll just move this up a little bit to say about, let's move it to about here. And then I'll use the offset, both sides, and let's use the same distance as before, should be fine. So I just left click to confirm, delete the original curve which is still selected, and then I'm going to select those 2 new curves and I'm going to extrude them. And let's go to the front view, and I'll just extrude this up a little bit. Maybe let's do 0.5. Delete the 2 curves which are still selected, select the new object, and I'm going to left click on it and just move it down a little bit to about here maybe. Select the base, Boolean difference, select the object that we want to subtract, and right click to confirm the operation, and there we go. That is our groove. Before I add the chamfers and fillets, I'm going to select everything and Control drag a copy out, and I'll move it back there. This is going to be our backup. So let's move it to somewhere over here out of the way, and then we can start adding the details to this object here. Before I do that, I'm going to select this, delete it, and I'm going to select one of these cutouts, and you can see it's also called base, which is not what I want. I'll just rename that to cutout 1. Make sure to deselect this object before you select the next one, and I'm going to rename all of these. So now let's select them, control drag a copy, and I'll move it over to here. And now we can start filleting the edges. And we're going to do different sizes of fillets, and we're going to start with the bigger ones. And I'll start with the base, select it, Alt-Q to isolate it, and then I'm going to start selecting the edges that I want to fillet, which are these ones. Just checking if I selected everything that I want, and it looks like I did. So now we can go to construct, fillet. In this case, I want to add a fillet, and let's try an offset of 1. And I think that's looking fine, so I'll just right click to confirm. That's it, Alt Q, and I'm going to select these 4 objects, hit Alt Q again to isolate them, and then I'm going to edge mode, and I'll select all of these edges here. As well as the ones down here. And I'm going to fillet these with the same radius. Right click to confirm the operation, hit Alt Q, and now we have this. And I'll just select these again, hit Alt Q to isolate them, and I'm going to apply a fillet to the other edges. So let's use another fillet. In this case, I want a pretty small one, and MoI will not try and fillet the edges that have already been filleted, so we don't need to worry about those. And we need a much smaller radius here. Let's try 0.1 maybe. And that doesn't seem to work. I'll just hit escape. I'm not sure what the problem might be, but this is one of the things that you will encounter a lot in Moment of Inspiration. You'll try to fillet edges, and for some reason it's not working. I don't know enough about MoI yet to be able to tell you what the problem actually is. Let's just try and let's just select this object and try that fillet again. I'll try 0.05 this time and see if that works. So in this case, the problem is that we picked a radius that was too big. I do want to make this a little bit bigger though, so let's try 0.07, see if that works, and that's still working, but it may be a little bit too big, so I'm going for 0.06. And that doesn't seem to work. I'll just try that again. 0.06. And that's working. So I'll just right click to confirm the operation, and then I'm going to select the other 3 objects and hit fillet again. This time I'm using a shortcut, and right click to confirm the operation, hit Alt Q to bring back the other object, and I'll select this one, isolate it, and use fillet again with the same settings, and let's see if these work here, and they do, which is good. So just right click to confirm, Alt Q to unhide the rest of the objects, and there we go. That is our finished sci-fi prop. So now we can export this as an OBJ, and use it in Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and do that. And in order to export the object, we need to select what we want to export. In this case, it's just the high-res version of our Kitbash object. And before I do anything else, I'm going to save that file. Tutorial MoI Kitbash. And then what I can do is I can go to File and Export. And I'll change the file type to wavefront OBJ. You have various other formats you can export to, but in this case I'm just going to pick an OBJ, and I'll give it a name, Kitbash part, and save it. And what happens now is you get a preview of the geometry that's going to be exported. And if you zoom in, you can see that we have an awful lot of detail on those fillets, but we don't really have a high-res object as far as the bigger curves are concerned. And I want to change that. So over here we have our meshing options, and by default MoI will output n-gons, which is fine with me. And you have a display option, which is shaded and edges. You can change that to just shaded or just to wireframe. I'm going to keep that at the default. And you can choose to export a lower poly object or a higher poly object, but still the detail on these small fillets is very high compared to the detail on those other curves, and I want to change that. So I'll bring that back to 12, I think is the default. And what we can do to change that and get rid of some of the detail on those small fillets and add more detail to those bigger curves is we can set a number for polygons that MoI shouldn't consider. And let's type in 0.1, and you can see we're getting rid of a lot of the resolution on these small curves here. So what that means is that we can now waste more polygons on those bigger curves by dragging this slider up and making this a higher res object. So let's try something like this. I'll do an angle of 7. I can't really explain to you what exactly all of these settings mean. I don't really know enough about MoI yet, but this is one thing that I found to be useful to get rid of the unnecessary detail on small fillets and instead create more detail on the curves that really matter. So I'm happy with these settings, so I'm going to hit OK, and this will export this object with the settings that we chose. And now we can go to Cinema 4D and import that OBJ. So here we are in Cinema 4D, and what we can do is just go to the Windows Explorer, and I have my OBJ here, and I can just drag and drop it into Cinema 4D. I'm going to keep the default settings here, and the nice thing about MoI is that whatever dimensions you chose in MoI, that is how big it will come into Cinema 4D. So I'll just hit OK, and there we have our object. And as you can see, we have 5 different objects. We have the base and we have each of the cutouts. I'm going to just remove that material. Go to the render settings, and I'll switch on ambient occlusion. And you can see this is looking pretty nice and smooth. What you probably want to do is keep these normal tags. If you remove them, you can see the shading changes. And I think because MoI is a Nurbs modeling software, surfaces just work a different way. We could try and select the Phong tag and bring this down and bring the Phong angle down to something lower. But in this case, it's not really working. We're still getting weird shading here. So your best option is to just keep those normal tags and the object will render just fine. So let's go ahead and I actually could have kept those materials. I'll just open this material here and I'll bring the color brightness down a little bit, switch off transparency, and for the reflectance I'm going to add a backman. Let's just remove that specular layer here. And for the backman I'm going to pick a conductor under the layer Fresnel, and let's switch that to iron. Drag it onto the null object, and let's see, I'm also going to reduce the reflection strength a little bit and add a little bit of roughness maybe, and let's bring the brightness down. And we won't be able to see much if we render this right now. Oh, actually we do, so that's cool. So I'm just doing something quick to do a quick test render. And for the render I'm going to use the Nikomedia Scene Rig, which is actually a pretty good plugin for Cinema 4D, and it's pretty inexpensive. It only costs 10 euros. So I'm going to insert a rig. And that's looking good. And I'll just add global illumination, just using the default settings here, and let's go ahead and render this to the picture viewer, and this may take a while. So there we go, this is our first MoI object rendered in Cinema 4D. I guess we could have done a few things a little differently. For example, the fillets on those cutouts here could have been bigger, but because we've saved a copy of the object in MoI without the chamfers, we can redo that and get nicer and smoother fillets on these cutouts here. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching this video, take care, and I'll see you again soon.